Hey friends, it's Len here from 1A Auto. Today we have another top problems for you. This one's on a 3rd gen Toyota Tacoma. Let's get started. Okay friends, for our first problem, obviously we're going to talk about a safety issue. That's just how I roll. On the V6 engines for the Toyota Tacomas, what they happen to find between the 16 and 17 model ranges was that the crank position sensor tend to go bad. Essentially what would happen when it did go bad was that if your RPMs were below the 3,000 RPM range and you go to accelerate rapidly, maybe try to get onto like a freeway or something like that, the vehicle might tend to stall out or even spit and sputter. The reason why that happens is because the crank position sensor is supposed to be reading where the crank's at as it's spinning for the revolutions per minute. If the sensor is cutting in and out, then the vehicle doesn't know exactly where the crank's at, so it can't time the engine properly, and obviously that's going to be an issue. If that happens, you're probably going to get a check engine light, and the check engine light code is probably going to be like a P0335. Now the location for this sensor on the V6 models is going to be located right inside your passenger side wheel well. If you were to move this out of the way by pulling out these clips, you're going to see the sensor right on the passenger side of the engine underneath the manifold. Quick talk about a fix for this, you're going to have to replace the crank position sensor. If they have an updated one, you go ahead and grab it, you pop it in there. If your check engine light's on, well, reset it. Take your vehicle for a road test. Now for the second problem on these vehicles, Toyota issued a recall and it has to do with your rear differential. Essentially what happens with it is along your carrier area right here, there's going to be a gasket in between this area and this area. It tends to leak. If it leaks, the fluid's obviously going to get low in there. There are a couple areas that could also leak, maybe right along here, along your pinion seal, or even down along this way. It's a little bit harder to see, but you probably would see some drips coming along your backing plate, and that would be from your axle seals. But typically what the actual recall is for is right along here. That's where you would see the leak for this recall. Some of the symptoms that you might find if you're having an issue with your rear differential fluid would be, of course, well, drips on the ground. We'll start with that one because it's very obvious. Other than that, you might actually even hear some noises. You might hear some vibrations, some chattering, and even in very bad conditions, you probably even hear some grinding or even worse noises. So now fixes for this, of course you could try to fix it on your own. You'd have to, of course, try to separate this, and there's going to be a whole bunch of things in there that you're probably not going to want to deal with. But like I said, it's a recall straight from Toyota. Why not just bring it to the dealer, have it checked out, and get it fixed for free? For problem number 3, we're going to be inside the vehicle. For this one, it has to do with your steering. Essentially what you're going to find is when you're sitting idling someplace and you try to turn the wheel, you have an idle surge with the steering input. Basically what I mean by that is you have your RPMs right up along here. This is your tachometer. Essentially, it should be approximately just under that 1,000 RPMs in between the 500 and the 1,000. You go to turn the wheel, especially if you're on something that's hard, you might notice that the RPMs or idle tends to drop down, and then you stop turning, it comes right back up. This can happen quite often, especially if you're trying to back out of a parking spot or anything like that where you're not actually accelerating. And you might find it to be an issue where sometimes the vehicle could actually even stall out, which isn't really as typical, but it could potentially happen. Luckily for all of us, Toyota issued a recall on this as well. So it's something that you can bring on down to the dealer. They're going to reprogram the ECM on your vehicle, which is basically the brain of your vehicle, and it's going to tell it what to do. So now it's not going to actually do that idle fluctuation for you. Now for the fourth problem on these vehicles, we're going to talk about a transmission hard shift issue. This is going to be in the Tacomas, obviously, that's what we're talking about, and it's going to be in the 6-speed automatic transmissions with the V6 engines. Some of the symptoms that you might happen to find if you're having an issue with your transmission is a delayed shift from either park to reverse or even reverse into drive. So essentially, you get ready to go, you go into reverse, you go to accelerate a little bit, nothing, boom, and it starts backing up a little bit, or even you go from reverse to drive. It takes a second before it goes into drive, and then finally it does, and you can continue. Other than that, it might have a harsh shift when you're in first gear. Essentially, you just put it in drive, you start going, you're accelerating, the RPMs go up, and then boom, into second gear, and then you can continue on, and then after that, it's usually pretty smooth. Aside from that, you could even be on the highway, maybe even using your cruise control here, and as you're cruising down the highway, you're doing 65 like you're supposed to, or whatever the speed limit is, it almost kind of feels as though the transmission's just kind of like shifting between gears on its own, even though maybe you're even on a level surface. That can be really kind of squirrely on the highway. It might make you feel a little bit insecure, and obviously, it's not probably the safest. You might also happen to notice if you're trying to drive up an incline, the transmission might seem as though it's not downshifting as fast as it should. So you're having a little bit harder of a time getting up the hill. It's kind of acting a little sluggish. And then finally, maybe it does actually downshift, and then you can of course accelerate the way that you want to. So for causes or fixes for this, essentially what it comes down to is a calibration issue with the engine's computer or with the vehicle's computer. Essentially, it just really doesn't know what's going on, when it's supposed to do, what it's supposed to do. So what you would have to do is go ahead and reprogram that computer. It's not necessarily something that you can do with one of those little handheld scanners. Typically, you would just go to the dealer, they're gonna reprogram the system for you, and you should be A-okay. Okay, so for the fifth problem on this one, we're gonna talk about the blower motor. And yeah, this isn't the one for this vehicle, but it is one that I have in my hand, so I can kind of show you what I'm talking about. Some of the symptoms that you might happen to notice if you're having this issue with your blower motor might be a strange noise coming from behind your dash, and usually it's gonna be coming from approximately this area here. Other things that you might happen to notice might be less than adequate air coming out of your vents, whether it's from the top up here or even there. It just doesn't seem like it's blowing out as much air as you think it should when maybe you put it on medium or even high speed. Other than that, you might even notice a little plasticky burning type smell. The reason for that is because of this right here. This little thing right here is considered your cage, and it goes on the electric motor aspect of the actual blower motor. There should be a shaft that comes up through, and then this is the connection point that makes it so it can spin. This is going to circulate the air. It's two separate parts. In between these two parts right here, they're supposed to kind of be adhered together. Usually it's with a clamp of some sort or even with some sort of glue or adhesive. But essentially what happens is the plastic on the cage itself will crack, and then it'll be just kind of loose on that shaft. So as the blower motor's turned on, it's trying to turn the shaft, but it's not actually spinning the cage as much as it should. It wears out the hole in here, and then of course, overall, the blower motor isn't gonna work at all. If this happens to you, the best thing that you could do would be to get underneath the dash and go ahead and replace the blower motor as an assembly. You do it as a whole assembly just like this, not just the cage and not just the motor. Usually when I replace a blower motor, it's kind of good habit to just replace the resistor as well. It costs a couple extra bucks, but in all honesty, it's gonna help you out in the long run. After that, you should be good to go. Okay friends, so that's what we've got for you on a Gen 3 Toyota Tacoma. Obviously every vehicle has its problems, otherwise I probably wouldn't have a job. With that said, if you have one of these vehicles with problems of your own, go ahead and put them in the comment section below, because I always love to hear from you. If you like the video, smash on the like button for me, it would mean the world. While you're at it, subscribe and ring the bell, that way there you can be kept up with all of our latest content. Thanks.